basically what we're trying to address with this research is the lack of training available, because there are things that can be done. Of course, they're not perfect, and we don't have like a perfect science on like do this, do that. You can't take a magical pill, but there are things that you can do that combined can increase your well-being and reduce that fatigue and just make you just generally better at working at night.
Despina, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast. So it would be great if you could just introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about your background, why you're interested in studying fatigue, and just a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, of course. So my name is Despina. I'm a PhD student in clinical psychology here in Montreal. And I've been doing research on how to reduce fatigue in shift workers for maybe 5-6 years now. This is good timing because we're just publishing the findings of our latest RCT, so we can talk about that. I became interested in the topic because one of my colleagues, his mom is a nurse, well, used to be a nurse, and he would see his mom come back from night shifts tired all the time. And then he took the sleep class, and he's like, and then when we met with my colleague Jay and Mary, this is the trio that does all the research. He was like, I have this idea. And then we're like, all right, knowing nothing about the topic. And then like 5-6 years later, we have like 3 papers. So it's very funny to me. And in the meantime, also I became a shift worker myself. So now I work in hospitals. I work in the emergency room as a crisis counselor. So I've done my fair share of night shifts, and I work with nurses and doctors. So it all kind of came together as an orientation that makes sense for me. As part of this research, really, that our aim was just to take all this like hard science and try to translate as much as possible into actionable things that people can do. We also came up with fatigue workshops, trying to make our suggestions as tangible as possible, because if there's anything that we know is that people in healthcare don't have time. So we can't just waste it. If we're going to give information, it has to be good and it has to be actionable. So that's kind of the framework that I've worked in for the past couple of years.
Fantastic. Well, I'm certainly going to try and draw some of that practical information from you in this conversation. I think people listening will be really pleased to hear that. So should we just start by talking about the problem at hand? So what is the difficulty with fatigue? What kind of problems does it cause in night shift workers, and why is it something worth studying in the first place?
Yeah, of course. So obviously, I think anybody who's worked a night shift can say that fatigue is a problem, and it's a well-documented one. And essentially, working night shifts leads to insomnia, leads to other types of sleep problems, and just can affect different spheres of your life, can affect your digestion in the long term. It can have effects on your metabolism. It can increase risks of cancer, a whole host of things that are backed up by research to various degrees. So it can have these effects. It doesn't mean that it necessarily has them on you, which is something that we do try to emphasize. The point is also not to necessarily just scare people, but it is a problem. And a lot of people who work night shifts, because it has very specific effects on their bodies, I think we believe that they should get trained on like what can they do to mitigate these effects, and usually they're not. So like it was surprisingly hard to find evidence on who's getting trained. Like we know, for instance, that in aviation, like they're good with fatigue. Like they track it, they realize that there are like consequences associated with it, and they're serious about it. In healthcare, we don't see the same type of monitoring, even though we know that errors increase at night. We know that tired nurses just don't do as well. And, and we also know that it's a job with a lot of turnover, and fatigue could be a factor that contributes to that stuff. So, basically what we're trying to address with this research is the lack of training available, because there are things that can be done. Of course, they're not perfect, and we don't have like a perfect science on like do this, do that. You can't take a magical pill, but there are things that you can do that combined can increase your well-being and reduce that fatigue and just make you just generally better at working at night.
I really like the fact that behind this, again, it's this sort of this practical application, right? It sounds like you're being driven not just by, oh, this is just something that could be interesting to research, but it's really looking at, how can we address this gap in a particular industry, healthcare, of sort of closing the gap and providing tools for people to actually use to improve their well-being and their performance as well, I guess.
Yeah.
So it's probably helpful, I guess, if we just talk a little bit, don't have to go into a huge amount of detail, but should we just talk a little bit about sleep and how sleep works and why night shifts are sort of particularly difficult with perhaps like rotating night shifts and that sort of thing? Can you just give us a little bit of an overview of that?
Yes. So everybody knows how sleep works, but here are some of the mechanisms that make it harder to sleep, basically, when you work shifts. So the idea is that we all have circadian rhythms. So circadian rhythms is essentially what we commonly call the biological, the biological clock. So we all have this biological clock that makes it so that we're more alert during the day and that we tend to be more sleepy at night. And this has evolved over, most animals have these, and it has evolved over time. So we're used to being on this like 24-hour, slightly longer cycle. And the thing is that when you work shifts, when you work day shifts, that's fine, because your body is most awake, most alert, most functional during the day, and then at night it performs its other functions, right? You rest, you regenerate, whatever happens at cellular levels.
Yeah.
But the problem is when you work night shifts is that flips. You're then expected to suddenly be awake and competent and be responsible for people's lives when your entire biology is telling you to sleep. And then the contrary, like you leave work, there's sunlight, and like you see people, going to work, and the social pressure and like the biological pressure is for you to keep going when we're supposed to be doing is like starting to sleep. So this flip here is what makes it really hard to sleep after night shifts. And then also, basically, once you've done a series of night shifts, a lot of the time your body will start slowly shifting its rhythm back to like accommodate to that. So which is and then all of a sudden you're used to, after a couple of night shifts, you wake up, you go to bed normally at 3 a.m., but then you have to start waking up at 7 a.m. again, because here come your day shifts. So that's another form of what we call a circadian misalignment, when your body's biology doesn't work with the demands of the environment. So all of this jumping back and forth is what makes it really hard to get good quality sleep.
Yeah, and I think it's really important to think about that evolutionary side of things, isn't it? Because it's essentially it's unnatural, isn't it? We're pushing against like millions of years of evolution, because our bodies are aligned to light, aren't they? External light, the sun. That is how mammals, how we've evolved, is to be sort of in sync with the rising and setting of the sun, and that's how our functions work. So especially rotating night and day shifts, it's very difficult, isn't it, for the brain and then the body to sort of work against that, basically, and to try and adapt.
Yeah, exactly. Because if, let's say, you just work nights, you could, if your social life permits it, try to adapt to be more of a night person. But if you're constantly rotating, you don't have that luxury, right? You have to kind of learn how to adapt to both.
I think something that's is interesting as well to sort of note is even when people work, if they're working just night shifts and they sort of feel like they've adapted to a certain extent with the way they sleep, like you mentioned, the sort of functions that our body has during nighttime, like your body is still trying to do those nighttime functions, even if you think you flipped your sleep cycle, right? So your body still isn't metabolizing in the same way, all that kind of cellular growth and repair and stuff. So even though you think that you've kind of flipped over and you might have optimized things by sleeping during the day and working at night, there's still stuff going on that is essentially could be damaging your body in some way. So let's talk about your research. So you did a pilot study, you've done a review article, and you've just followed it up with this great randomized controlled trial. So do you want to talk us through the sort of the premise of the study and the intervention, and just tell us about the findings? That'd be really, really great.
Yeah, of course. So we started with the question of how can we make a feasible intervention for nurses to help them adapt to night shifts. And what adapt to night shifts, we mean to shift their body clock later. So they're more alert later during the day. And so then they're more sleepy in the morning when they need to sleep. And like we've mentioned, from an evolutionary perspective, the most potent way to achieve those shifts is by controlling people's light exposure. So essentially, you give them bright light at a certain time, and arguably, as important, you get them to avoid light at other times. So usually what happens in lab studies is that you get you'd get people get this light exposure that is timed to their body clock late at night. That's usually where we see the most potent effects. And then they avoid light in the morning, and with that technique, you see that their body clock will shift. The issue with giving people light at night during the night is that they're at work, right? And that means that a lot of the conditions are out of their hands. Maybe they don't have institutional approval to use light at night. So, or like to have a light box. Maybe they just don't even have a space where they can use a light box. Maybe like using a light box on the unit will disturb patients or something. So like it adds this element that makes it not feasible. And then the other issue is also that light exposure is quite time sensitive. So the effect of the light can flip depending on when you give it. So the way that it works is that you have what's called the body temperature minimum, and that's the time during the day where your core body temperature is at its lowest. So if you've ever pulled an all-nighter and then you start getting the shivers between like 3 to 4 a.m., that's where you have your lowest body temperature. So if you give light before that, then that will shift your body clock later, which we call a phase delay, which is what we would want to adapt to a night shift. And then if you give the light after that body temperature minimum, it produces the opposite effect, which means that you have to be careful when you give it. And sometimes if you're giving it at night and you don't know exactly when you're giving it, you could actually be messing yourself up a little bit more. Like you're trying to delay, but then you actually advance, and then you're worse off than when you started. Mm-hmm. So these are the two main constraints when it comes to some of the big ones when it comes to light exposure. So we wanted to make it more feasible by trying to see, can we give it to people before they actually go to work? So that way it's in their control. So we gave 33 nurses working rotating shifts at 2 hospitals in Montreal. We gave them light boxes. I can show you the light box if you want.
Yes, I was actually thinking about this. I was thinking, should I get a picture up on Amazon or something?
There you go.
This is the
light box. Just a disclosure, I use the light box every morning just for seasonal effect.
Great. Well, that's another topic, isn't it? We'll have to do another podcast on that.
yeah, so we gave them a light box, exactly this model, and then we told them to get 40 minutes of bright light exposure as late as possible before they go to work. And that usually happened. Usually their shift started at 7 or 7:30, so it would be slightly before that. And then we also told them to avoid light in the morning by wearing sunglasses. Because if you also get light in the morning, that taps into that phase advancing portion of your biological clock. So then it undoes whatever you did in the evening. So the sunglasses are very important.
So that's because it's after the minimum body temperature.
Exactly.
The light, and even a little bit of light in the morning, it triggers that thing, and it sort of like pushes things out, and that's not what you want.
That's not what you want, with some caveats. There are always caveats when you talk about circadian rhythms. But that's the general idea of the timing of the light. And then we added some other things that I've seen in other studies help. So we also told people, because the idea is you want to maximize the amount of time that you sleep, because you will have some sort of sleep debt. So we told people to sleep in the morning on the day of their first night shift, to try to nap in the evening if they can, and when they sleep, to sleep in a dark environment, because again, when you sleep during the day, you get more ambient light, so you need to make sure that there is no light, so because it can also affect your circadian rhythms and it just generally your quality of sleep if you sleep, if you don't sleep in a dark environment. So we gave them a sleep mask. So that was the intervention, and people followed it. In the pilot study, they followed it for I think 2 to 5 consecutive shifts, depending on their work schedules, which varied quite a bit because it was a field study. And then they did it for twice as long during the second study, during the randomized control trial, where we did 2 periods of them using it. And then, so in the first study, we compared them following the intervention versus not following the intervention. And we did find that the intervention reduced fatigue and errors, and it also led to longer sleep. And we also saw a bit of an increase in positive mood. So that was, and this is from 50 minutes of bright light exposure before the shift. Which is quite nice, because it's very different from like 3 hours of light exposure from like 1 to 3, which is usually, it's something you'd see in like studies, in lab studies. So then we wanted to replicate these findings. So we ran a randomized control trial, and then what we did here is we wanted to have an active control. So an active control is also a control that does things. So it controls for people's expectations, because in this sense, everybody would expect to improve. So then we gave them a intervention that leads to better alertness during the night, but doesn't affect circadian rhythm. So we used food in this case. So we told people to eat, how to eat in order to maximize their alertness. So eat before going to work, and if you're going to eat during the night, try to eat low protein meals, because those are harder to digest and they can slow you down. And what we saw here is that, again, we replicated that there was a positive effect for errors. So, and it's, what I find quite impressive is that, so in the first study, errors were reduced by, I believe, 53%, or something like that, and this one by 56. So that's over 50%, right? Like, it's quite an impressive drop in the error rate. And then we also saw that the intervention reduced fatigue, and there was also a small increase in sleep duration and mood. But those were quite small, but generally the overall effect is quite positive. And we also saw positive effects from the control intervention on their fatigue. So that so overall we got quite positive findings from an intervention that's relatively non-invasive. It does require people to commit, so they have to get the light exposure before every night shift. They have to wear their sunglasses in the morning. They have to pay attention to their sleep, but it's quite feasible, and people rated it as quite feasible in the study themselves. And nurses said that they'd be willing to implement it in the long term.
That's amazing. I mean, you know, that figure, 56 and 53% of reduction in errors. Did I get that right?
Yes,
Yeah.
now I'm wondering if the percentages are right.
Yeah,
My colleagues
well, I'm sure that seems to be right
they're
from what I remember
very
from the
close.
study. Yeah,
Plus minus 1%.
yeah. I mean, from an organizational perspective and just a public health perspective, I mean, it's incredible, isn't it? That of course they're self-perceived errors, aren't they? But still, that's really impressive. And there's this sort of like double whammy effect, isn't it? That individually for nurses it helps reduce fatigue, but then if they're actually reducing errors, that's got to be a nicer shift, right? If you feel like you're just performing
Okay,
better.
so I double checked the numbers. It's actually 67% error
Wow.
drop. Yeah, so yeah, no, it's honestly, it's quite impressive. We're still, I mean, and we probably wouldn't have believed it if we didn't replicate it.
Yes. Well, that's the
I think
beauty of your
that's the
work.
big deal too. Yeah, that
Um,
was just a fluke.
so I want to just go back to the protocol because I know people listening to this will be sort of like thinking, right, like after I've listened to this, what can I do? Like I want to stop listening to this, and tonight I want to try this out. So let's just talk about some of the practicalities. So I know you spoke about the light box.
Mhm.
What, because light boxes differ in the intensity of their light, don't they? So there's a measure called lux, which
Yes.
is which is would you want to just tell us a little bit about that and what you'd recommend based on what you used in your study?
Yeah. So in terms of lux, so basically the recommendation is anything above 1,000 lux should work.
Mhm.
I think we used 5,000 in our study. The thing about lux is that they vary with distance. So what you want to get is, if you want to get a light box, is something that nominally emits 10,000 lux of wide spectrum light, and that has a UV filter. Usually they all do. But these are usually the considerations, and they can be quite affordable. You can get nicer models. You can also get, I've seen them sold at drugstore. I'm trying to not be Canada specific.
Chemists.
What translates here? I don't want to just say Amazon, but you can buy one on Amazon if you want. Yeah.
Yeah, online retailers.
Yeah. Your friendly online
Yeah.
retailer.
Yeah, I mean they're really widely available now, aren't they? I think because of the research, especially that's been done around seasonal affective disorder as well. I think that has made they sort of proliferated, haven't they, in the past sort of 10 years or something. Yeah. And the technology it's become a lot cheaper to buy. So it really is an affordable sort of solution. And I mean, I suppose again, like we said, maybe do another podcast for this. But yeah, if you're someone who does suffer from sort of low mood in the winter as well, they can be helpful for that. So, and something I wanted to ask actually, so the intensity is important, the 10,000 lux. So, you know, let's pretend I'm a nurse, I've put it on, I've set a timer 45 minutes before I go on shift. If you're in the room, so what did you recommend to the nurses about
So
whether they sat in front of it or?
Yeah, we tell people for it to be at arm's length. You don't have to look directly at it because it's quite bright. Wait, I'll demonstrate. See, it's quite bright.
For
Like
anyone just listening to this, Despina has just suddenly been spotlit and is lit up.
Exactly. So I don't use it for Zoom meetings.
Yeah.
So it's quite bright. So you can keep it at arm's length, and you don't have to look directly at it. I usually, I mean, when I just use it for, because it does have an acute effect where it's alerting. So I use it in the morning usually. So I use it as I work, as I'm on the computer, as I eat breakfast. I can even put on my makeup. You can do whatever you need to do when you get ready and use it. You don't have to just stare at it. People do all kinds of things. Yeah.
Okay, that's good. I mean, that's less restrictive, isn't it? Because I think I can imagine some people being put off by thinking, right, so I've just got to sit in front of a light for 40 minutes before my shift. that probably wouldn't be too attractive an option for a lot of
No,
people.
exactly. And you can
Um,
also, like, if you want, you can flick it on for longer and you can just go back and forth and do whatever you need to do. It doesn't necessarily have to be consecutive.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then the sunglasses. So after the shift, do you
Yes.
have any recommendations? Not for a brand necessarily, but for a particular style or
So
anything
the
like that?
idea is you want, so there are like multiple schools of thought here. It's one of the reasons why I like this research. It really gets into the nitty gritty. It
Mm,
satisfies some like obsessional part of myself.
yeah,
Like ideally you would get blue blocking sunglasses, which are like orange tinted. I personally find them horrendous. But if you're the type that doesn't mind, you can get those. You can also just get darker sunglasses. They also work. Like in our study, we just literally told nurses to bring their own sunglasses and we just checked that they're dark. So like don't go for like Britney Spears in the early 2000s. Try to go for like a darker shade.
yeah.
Um, and it should be fine. The caveat there though is that so the benefit of light in the morning is that it's alerting, right? So if you've just finished a night shift, and we know that shift workers are at greater risk for car accidents. So if you're driving home and you don't feel alert, don't wear the sunglasses. Like you don't want, it's not like, sure, you might not shift your circadian rhythms, but also you won't get into a car accident, right? So that's the caveat with wearing the sunglasses in the morning. If you're feeling sleepy, don't contribute to that sleepiness.
I think that's a
Yeah.
really great additional piece of safety advice.
Yeah, and well that's so exactly. And on the contrary, if you're feeling sleepy in the morning and you're about to drive home, I'm gonna take back all of my advice and say that you do get bright light. So if you can like walk around a little bit for 5 minutes or something in like sunlight to wake up, let it wake you up a little bit and then drive. Like there is one study where they use bright light and they saw that in the lab study, obviously it increased like driving performance after a night shift.
All right,
You can also use it in that way as well. Yeah.
great. So I think it'd be useful actually just to ask you a little bit, because I know you do workshops and you mentioned at the beginning, didn't you, about you talk about some other general recommendations. You've delivered this to nurses and other healthcare professionals. And there's some other kind of quick little recommendations that you'd like to mention as well that can be helpful for either fatigue or for sleep.
Yeah, of course. So if we're gonna talk about the more circadian stuff, it's good to know that if you're gonna nap in the afternoon, usually it's easiest to nap between like 2 and 6 p.m. roughly, because that's when you have a dip in alertness. Um, and again, consistent with our recommendations for the control group, like if you want to maximize your alertness while you work, do try to get your proper dinner before you go to your night shift, and then try to, if you're hungry, try to have healthy snacks with you at work, and then have a low protein breakfast in the morning, like oatmeal and a banana or something like that. That's going to help, and that's also going to help with presumably with your sleep quality. And also we know that people at night, when they're more tired, they tend to just eat more junk.
Hmm.
So if you prepare your snacks in advance and all of those things, it's better for your alertness in the moment, but it's probably also better for your health in the long run. And one of my favorites is about drinking water, because basically if you're dehydrated, that can lead to cognitive impairments. And by the time that you're sleepy, by the time that you're thirsty, you're already dehydrated. So one of the ways to make sure that you maintain your alertness throughout the night is to drink water as much as possible.
Proactively.
Proactively. So like when we want to be corny in our workshops, we just say to have a drinking buddy. So like, and you turn it into a great drinking game that like every time I drink water, you drink water, and it just goes on.
That's
Uh,
nice.
yeah, exactly. So there, and then the other joke that I like to make because I'm full of myself, but it's very true, is that like, so the things that are quite alerting, if you're very sleepy, are to like physical activity, and also to just generally be engaged in what you're doing. So there's nothing more engaging than like socializing and gossiping. So I'm saying that if you're ever like quite really tired at the end of your rope, just try to walk around with a colleague and like gossip, and that will, that will keep you awake. And obviously you can nap if you're sleepy, and then if you nap, try like even just a 10-minute nap can be beneficial. If you nap for, let's say, 30 minutes, then you're likely to have sleep inertia, so that part of that, like feeling of grogginess after you nap. So if you can, I mean, a lot of the times it's not possible, but if you can, try to plan for an extra like 15 minutes after your nap, so that when you wake up, you have time to get over the grogginess. Because if not, it is possible that errors can increase. Yeah, and then there are the obvious ones, but they're just good to keep in mind, that if you can't, like, there's nothing wrong with drinking coffee, but keep in mind that caffeine has a pretty long half-life. So, I mean, the recommendation varies. We say try not to drink it at least 3 hours before bed. Some people say 6 hours before bed.
Mm.
And I mean, we're all people here, do whatever you can, but like ideally don't drink it too close to bed, because then it can impact your sleep. So you get into these like negative feedback loops. Yeah, so these are some of the stuff that and then there's all the obviously the sleep hygiene stuff, which people know, but some of them are interesting to me. For instance, just the importance of having some sort of way to block noise during the day, because a lot of people have families and they'll have like children screaming downstairs and they're trying to sleep, right? And even if you're sleeping, your brain does pick up on like noise,
Mm.
and it can affect like the quality of your sleep. So something like a noise machine or a fan or um, can really make a difference. Um, yeah.
Yeah,
So
that's the sleep environment is so important, isn't it? And I think with most people, there's little things that can be done to optimize it even more. Like just sort of jumping on what you just said there, white noise machines are good, and a sort of way of blocking out some external noise that can be really helpful. And you mentioned about darkness as well. I think it's getting good blackout blinds or curtains is a really good investment, isn't it? Because as we've been talking about this whole episode, like light has such a powerful effect on the brain. So even when your eyes are closed or whatever, it's still affecting your
yeah,
brain, because through your eyelids, isn't it? Basically, there's still sensors there.
and that also includes our beloved phones, right?
Mm.
Try. I mean, again, it's hard because people de-stress in different ways, right? You can tell one person avoid light before you go to bed, but then they're like, "But I watch my Netflix show, and that's how I de-stress after like a long day." A long night at the hospital. So again, do whatever works for you. But if you're going to use your phone, you can turn down your brightness, right? Those are things that, so you don't have to not use it at all, but just make sure that you're not 100% brightness, that it can also make a difference.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for all of those really helpful practical points. I'll make sure that in the show notes for this episode, we have all of those written, listed down, so people can take a look at them. I'm really excited to see where the light exposure intervention goes. I can't remember whether you told me before, have you got another study you're working on with that, or do you know anyone else who is working on that? Sort of further
So
replication or
we don't have anything in the pipe right now. We're still excited about this study.
yeah.
But where we're going forward is, so when we are gonna, so right now the RCT is in review, and when we publish, the paper is going to be published. We also want to publish our website, which does have basically which people will be able to use to generate their own like light schedules based on their work times, and all tips that I've mentioned, and we're with all the references and the science stuff that we're gonna keep up to date. And we're also gonna keep giving workshops. So once the study is launched, once the website is launched, I'll make sure that you get it, and then you can share it with people.
Yeah, that would be really helpful. I'm sure people will be reaching out to get that, definitely. Well, Despina, it's been a real pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for sharing the results of your study and all your other practical wisdom. Congratulations with the study, and I know you're sort of getting it published at the moment, so I wish you the best of luck with that.
Thank you. And thanks for having me. I am always happy to talk about how to reduce fatigue. And I personally, it's one of the fun things for me is to keep up with the literature and figure out what is the newest thing, the newest, most efficacious thing. So
Yeah.
if I ever have anything else, I'll let you know.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, maybe you can come back on sometime and tell us a bit more about what's going on in the world, the research world next year or something.